This recording will cover Chapter 11 in your textbook, Spoken Language Difficulties, Listening and Speaking. Okay, took me a minute to advance the slide. Sorry about that. So here's the two truths and a lie for this chapter. I struggle every time. Again, you don't have to do anything. Just go ahead and see if you can figure out which one is a lie. You don't have to justify it to me or anybody, but just think about it. See which ones are true and which one is a lie. All right, so thinking about language forms, the integrated language core, the language core really consists of listening, speaking, writing, and reading, right? All of these kind of components work together to form the language core, okay? Which ones do you think come first? Listening and speaking, right? And if you read your textbook, that's what you'll read in the textbook. So think about little babies. First, they learn to listen, right? They listen when you call their name. They listen when you babble to them. They listen when you have a little story time with them about anything, right? They will listen to anything. They'll listen to, their squeaky toys. They will listen to musics. A lot of them have like little mobiles or something that go around while they're, playing or trying to sleep or whatever. So they learn to listen. Then they learn to speak, right? They start by babbling back to us. They imitate you. They imitate, who's ever around them. They have, quote unquote conversations with their parents, with their dogs, with their stuffed animals, with their neighbors, whoever. And then they really learn to speak, of course, as they get older. My little neighbor, she is I think she's around 2. But she and my dog, first of all, are little best friends. They're very cute. But she and I had a conversation the other day about there was a dead mouse or a dead mole or something out in my yard. And she was kind of investigating it. And I said something like, oh, you can look at it, but don't touch it because that's yucky. And she said, yucky? She kind of repeated. She doesn't know what yucky means, but just by me, kind of making the face and kind of shooing my hands away, kind of saying, oh, that's yucky, yucky. And then we were talking about something else, and I said, well, that's stinky. And she said, oh, it's stinky. And I said, you're right, that, and just having those conversations, that's how they learn to listen and speak, right? I was telling her something was stinky, but yeah, she just repeated it. And I said, oh, we have to keep Georgia, my dog, out of that because it's stinky. And she said, oh, and she would say something like, whether Georgia stinky. I said, you're right. And so, just encouraging those conversations. And then individuals learn how to write and they learn how to read. First the listening and speaking, then the writing and reading. So thinking about just kind of this relationship of all 4 of these forms, right? So the input or receptive skills, what are we receiving in or how are we doing that? By listening and reading. And what is our output? What is our expressive skills? Well, that comes through in our speaking and writing, and all of that forms that language core. So the communication process, I'm sure most of you are like, yep, that's how it goes. We have a sender, a receiver, the idea comes through the central nervous system. Then the sender of the message will either speak or write the message. And those are those encoding skills. Okay, so anytime you hear encoding, think of speaking and writing. Then we have a receiver. That person will either listen or maybe read the message if it's something, that was written down over here by the sender. Those are decoding skills, all right? So our encoding skills, not spills, come on the side of the sender, and our decoding skills come on the side of the receiver. Then same thing, kind of travels backwards through this pathway, goes through the central nervous system, and then that's the idea that we hear or that we read. All right, so thinking about how children acquire language, of course, you can think in your mind about an example of the application of each theory. You don't have to, say anything or write anything, but just think in your mind about this behavioral therapy, right? That imitation and reinforcement, kind of what I was just talking about. Little kids especially, they will imitate everything, right? Anything you say. So even, if you say bad words, they're going to repeat those bad words. My friends have now he's almost 6 years old. And they, apparently, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, they were leaving his daycare or something. And he wasn't saying goodbye to somebody or something. And one of the teachers said, oh, so-and-so, why aren't you saying goodbye? And he said, because I'm a blank, and I'm not going to say it, but it was a word that, his parents had used, not in relation to him, just kind of, in conversation. And so he decided it was an appropriate time to imitate that word. So, as I'm sure those of you who have had or have young children know, they hear everything. So but that's how behaviorally, that's how they learn, right? And then we reward them for their language attempts. The developmental theory, those innate factors, what the brain is predisposed for language learning. That's one of the benefits, or some might say the curse, of, being a human, right? We have that capability and that predisposition for language. And then the social theory, the social factors that go along with language, and how language is learned through social interaction, with other people. Okay, components of language systems, we have phonology, which are those phonemes, right? Those sound units. So thinking about in the word cat, we would have 3 phonemes, right? Three sounds. K, at. Not talking about the letters right now, just the sounds. K, at, right? Those are those sound units. Okay, then we have morphology, morphemes. Those are the meaning units. And so as your textbook talks about, in the word boy, B-O-I, right? The morpheme, there's one morpheme. There's one meaning unit. We can all kind of picture what a boy, what boy means. But if we make it plural, if we say boys, well, then we have 2 meaning units, 2 morphemes, right? We have boy plus the plurality, plus the S, plus the more than one. So that means something. Boys, plural, right, means something different than boy. Okay, and don't worry, this chapter, this is one chapter about language and stuff like that. You will get more of it from Dr. Gunther, Dr. McHuston, Dr. Midcalf Carpenter, Dr. Murphy. There's a lot more opportunities for language and reading and ELA, I promise. Okay, syntax, so I am going, I know, kind of quickly. Syntax is that grammar and sentence structure, using correct grammar and sentence structure socially, right? That pragmatic side. And then semantics is word meaning. Okay, so we want to think about, when we're thinking about language, we have both speech disorders and we have language disorders or language problems. Okay, so some speech disorders, articulation, right? Maybe you know a student who struggles to make that TH sound, or struggles to make the B sound or the S sound, especially little kids, right? When they're missing some teeth, sometimes, oh my gosh, apparently I have it too. Sometimes they have a hard time, saying, right? Because there's nothing to stop their tongue. So articulation difficulties, voice disorders, fluency disorders, this would be something like stuttering or speaking very disfluently, where it's very choppy, there's a lot of pauses, stuff like that. Those are your speech disorders. And then your language problems or your language disorders are, things like difficulty with phonological awareness. Language disorders, again, receptive or expressive, what we're receiving in and what we are expressing out. What are we putting out? And this also impacts your English as English language learners, right? Some of you might work with students for whom English is not their first language. So they might have some limited English proficiency, which might lead to some language difficulties or some language problems. Okay, again, you don't have to answer this. This is just kind of for your own reference. What is this type of language disorder called? See if you can figure out, going back to this slide, what you think each one is. Again, don't submit it, don't turn it in, just for your knowledge. Okay, so when we're thinking about teaching language, especially for our younger students, I know some of you are currently working with early childhood students or in the in the early childhood environment. Some of you you might want to get into working with those younger students. So thinking about the stages of oral language development, those problems, activities for natural language stimulation, right? Just having those conversations. Me and the 2-year-old, I tell you, we talk about everything. We were talking about bubbles. We were talking about chalk. Just having those conversations and letting those young children, our younger guys and girls, talk back to you. I don't mean talk back to you, talk with you, talk at, have a conversation. Come up with some activities for teaching spoken language. In the younger grades, it's very natural, right? We talk about language and everything. Oh, you're in the housekeeping center. Tell me what you're doing in the housekeeping center. And they might, I'm going to fix dinner. Oh, you're making dinner. Oh, what are you making for dinner? Well, so and pasta and oh, you're making pasta. Tell me all about that, right? Just giving our young children the opportunities to have those language interactions and that that those experiences. Those of you who work with the older students, the adolescents, how can you get our older students to speak more? Some of you know middle school students, a lot of them teenagers, right? A lot of them don't really talk a lot. I have two nephews. One is currently 15 and the other one is he just turned 13. And the 15-year-old, he does not shut up. And I mean that in the best way possible. We were all up there. They live in Maryland, and he's very afraid of the cicadas, which are coming out the year that I'm recording this. But I lost my train of thought. We were up there a couple weeks ago, and the 15-year-old, he just kept talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking to the point at one point I was like, oh my gosh, you talk a lot. And I said, and that's a good thing, given that you're, 15. He called me on my birthday. We were on the phone for over an hour. The other one called me and he was like, hey, happy birthday. And I was like, well, how are you? What's going on? He's like, fine, nothing. Conversation was done in 2 minutes, right? So thinking about ways that we can improve the oral language of our adolescents. We also want to think about how we can teach some listening strategies. Listening really means that comprehension, right? You have to listen to what someone is saying to understand their meaning or, to understand what they're trying to communicate. So thinking about comprehension, building that listening vocabulary, understanding sentences, especially for our younger students, critical listening to stories, books on tape used to be a big thing. I know now there's not really tape players per se. I still have some tapes. Thank you very much. I don't have a tape player, but I'm still keeping my books on tape, but letting your students, even older students, letting them listen to, go on YouTube. There's somebody's out there has read almost every story that you could ever need. I needed one when I was teaching an early childhood math class once. I couldn't find the book anywhere. None of the libraries had it. I went on YouTube and there was a video of a teacher reading it to her class. So thinking about ways that we can teach listening, thinking about ways to promote early literacy, again, those early language activities, creating a literacy rich environment, have literacy and language everywhere. Teaching those concepts about print, we read from left to right. Here's how you hold the book. Here's how you flip through the pages of the book, stuff like that. And again, the older students will typically know these things, but for your younger students, especially your students who might have some language disabilities or speech language problems, they're going to need to be taught more explicitly, some of these skills. Word and sound games. I was thinking about this, my cousin, I'm 5 years older than her. And when we were little, we used to have, sleepovers. We lived in, 7 hours away, and we would always sing that song, like Lisa, Lisa, Bobisa, Banana Fana, Fofisa, Fee-Fi, Momisa, Lisa, or whatever. And then the next person would go and come up with either a name or a funny word. All of that helps to promote that early literacy. Early writing, all of these things, even if your students aren't spelling correctly, that's okay, right? Encourage that writing, encourage that vocabulary. All of those things will help with early literacy. Okay, we have a few more. A segmenting card for speech sounds. I've heard this called Elkonin box, whatever you want to call it. The students would be given little markers or chips, and then you would say a word, sun, and they would move a marker into the box for each sound that they hear. Sun, right? Something like that. Okay, so you want to think about teaching oral language. Of course, you don't have to add one more item to the list. Providing opportunities for talking, explaining, point of view, discussion groups, all of these things, right? Especially as they're getting older. Teaching vocabulary, use role playing, let students talk about themselves. They love that and what they're interested in. They love that, and that will encourage that oral language. Okay, that's it. So that was chapter 11. Again, make sure you're reading the textbook, keeping up with that, because there are some much more thorough examples and everything in the textbook, but those are some ways that you can teach oral language, teach these early language skills, speech sounds, stuff like that.